For decades, stories from the heavy metal world have been told and retold, each time adding new layers of myth to an already larger-than-life history. One such story that has lingered in the halls of rock folklore is the tale of when Metallica, then still young, hungry, and largely unknown outside the underground, opened for the Prince of Darkness himself, Ozzy Osbourne. At the time, Jake E. Lee was Ozzy's guitarist, stepping into the unenviable position of following Randy Rhoads and bringing his fiery style to albums like Bark at the Moon and The Ultimate Sin. Now, after years of relative silence on the subject, Jake E. Lee has opened up about what it was like to witness Metallica at such an early stage and how he viewed the pairing of Ozzy with the then rising Thrash outfit. His words shed light not only on that particular tour, but on the cultural crossroads of heavy metal in the mid-1980s, when traditional metal and thrash were colliding to create something new and enduring. To understand the weight of Jake E. Lee's comments, it's important to step back to the mid-1980s. Ozzy Osbourne was already a towering figure, having cemented his legacy with Black Sabbath and then launching a wildly successful solo career. By 1983 and 1984, Ozzy was filling arenas worldwide, with fans flocking to hear his hits like Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, and the darker theatrical material from Bark at the Moon. Jake E. Lee, who joined Ozzy after the tragic death of Randy Rhoads, brought a different style, flashy, technical, and aggressive, but not a clone of his predecessor. His work gave Ozzy's music a fresh bite, keeping the solo band relevant in a time when glam metal was rising and traditional metal was evolving. Metallica, by contrast, were the new kids on the block. Having released Kill 'Em All in 1983 and Ride the Lightning in 1984, the band was beginning to attract attention. But they were still an underground phenomenon compared to Ozzy. Their raw, thrash-driven sound was a world away from Ozzy's polished stage show, yet their hunger and ferocity made them impossible to ignore. When asked about Metallica opening for Ozzy, Jake E. Lee didn't sugarcoat his impressions. "They were kids, man, just kids with a lot of energy," Lee recalled. "I remember thinking, these guys are rough around the edges, but there's something there. You couldn't miss it." James Hetfield had that stare, Lars Ulrich was banging like his life depended on it, and Kirk Hammett was still figuring out his voice on guitar. But the energy, it was undeniable. Lee admits that, at first, he wasn't sure how Ozzy's fans would take to Metallica's thrash sound. Ozzy's crowd at that time, they wanted the classics. They wanted Iron Man, Paranoid, Crazy Train. Metallica was something different, fast, heavy, almost punk in their attitude. Some nights the crowd didn't know what to do with them, but other nights you could see it clicking, like fans realized they were watching the next big thing. The Ozzy Metallica tour wasn't just a generational passing of the torch, it was also a clash of styles. Ozzy's show was theatrical, with smoke machines, lights, and his larger-than-life personality carrying the night. Metallica, on the other hand, came with little spectacle, just volume, speed, and attitude. Jake E. Lee said the contrast was striking. "We'd come out with the full stage production, all the bells and whistles. Metallica? They just came out and killed it with their energy. No frills, no tricks, just music. And you know what? It worked. They didn't need anything else." That rawness, Lee admits, forced Ozzy's band to stay sharp. When you've got a hungry band like that opening for you, you can't phone it in. You know they're going to go out there and give it 110%. We had to make sure we matched that energy when we hit the stage. Beyond the stage, Jake E. Lee also shared what it was like behind the scenes. "They were quiet, compared to what people might think," Lee explained. "You'd expect them to be partying hard every night, but honestly, they were focused. James kept to himself a lot. Kirk was friendly, and Cliff was the soul of that band. He was the one I connected with the most. He had this calm, thoughtful presence. When you talked to him, you knew he cared about the music above everything else." Lee admits he didn't hang out with Metallica extensively, but he respected their work ethic. They weren't there to be rock stars yet. They were there to prove themselves. And that, to me, said everything. Any discussion of Metallica in the Ozzy years inevitably circles back to Cliff Burton, the bassist whose untimely death in 1986 shocked the metal world. Jake E. Lee spoke about Cliff with particular reverence. Cliff was different. You could see it in the way he played, the way he carried himself. He wasn't just headbanging, he was feeling it. And like the music was running through his veins. I think he grounded the band, kept them focused on the music instead of the chaos around them. His loss was massive, not just for Metallica, but for music in general. Lee also touched on Ozzy's reaction to Metallica's rise. Ozzy liked them, Lee said. He saw the energy, the fire, and he respected that. I don't think anyone knew just how big they'd get, but Ozzy had an instinct for talent. He gave them that shot, and look what happened. Sometimes all a band needs is that platform. In later years, Ozzy himself would confirm this sentiment, saying that bringing Metallica on the road was one of the best moves he ever made. For Metallica, it was the launching pad that took them from cult heroes to future arena headliners. With decades of perspective, Jake E. Lee reflects on Metallica's meteoric rise with a mixture of admiration and bemusement. "Look, I didn't think they'd become that big," he admitted. "Nobody could have predicted it, but I did know they were onto something. They weren't copying anyone. They weren't trying to be Ozzy or Sabbath or Priest. They were doing their own thing, and in this business, that's rare. That's why they made it." Lee also acknowledged the historical weight of that tour. When people talk about metal history, they always bring up the Ozzy Metallica tour. It was like a changing of the guard, even if we didn't know it at the time. Ozzy was already a legend, and Metallica was about to become one. To be there, to witness that, it's something I'll never forget. The impact of Metallica opening for Ozzy Osbourne cannot be overstated. For one, it exposed thousands of traditional metal fans to thrash, planting seeds that would later blossom into mainstream acceptance of the genre. For another, it gave Metallica the stage experience and exposure they needed to take the next leap. Jake E. Lee sees it as a pivotal moment in the evolution of heavy music. That tour showed that metal wasn't one thing. You had Ozzy doing his classic heavy rock, and then you had Metallica pushing it into overdrive. It gave fans a glimpse of the future, and that's powerful. Nearly 40 years later, fans still talk about the Ozzy Metallica tour with a kind of reverence. Bootleg recordings, grainy photos, and old ticket stubs are treasured relics. For many who attended, it was the night they discovered Metallica, or the night they saw two eras of metal collide on one stage. Jake E. Lee, for his part, is content to have played his role in that history. "I was there, doing my thing with Ozzy, and Metallica was finding their way. None of us knew we were making history, but looking back, that's exactly what it was, and I'm proud to say I was part of it." When Jake E. Lee breaks his silence on Metallica opening, for Ozzy, what comes through is not just nostalgia, but a deep respect for the hunger, talent, and individuality that defined Metallica in their early days. His reflections highlight the significance of that moment, when the old guard of metal shared the stage with the future kings of the genre. In the end, the story of Metallica opening for Ozzy is more than a footnote. It's a turning point. It's the moment when thrash metal went from underground to unstoppable, when fans saw the raw potential of a band that would go on to dominate arenas, festivals, and charts worldwide. And for Jake E. Lee, it's a memory etched in the annals of metal history, a night-after-night reminder that sometimes the future is standing right there in front of you, tuning up their guitars, waiting for their shot at glory.